start the recording. Okay, I hope you can see the Atom editor. So last time we were talking about headers and libraries. I just wanted to complete one small thing before we start something new. And okay, so it's not here. Yeah. So I hope you can see the slide on the screen. Last time we talked about libraries. So if you want to create your own library, we discussed what you have to do last time. But if you are having some problem trying to create a library of the type that we discussed in the last class, that is a .a library, putting it in an archive and so on, what you can do is you can simply compile the library that you want. That is the first step that we did in making a library. That's compile it with the -c option, get a .o, that is an object file, which is the machine language file essentially, and then you can generate your executable using GCC directly by giving all the files that are required, right? So here is an example. So let us say the functions which are in this file gfunctions.c is the one which you want to make into a library, right? This is the same as last time, and this is your uh, ffunctions.c is the file in which you want to use the functions of gfunctions.c. Okay, and then you have the header file which tells what is present in gfunctions.c. So ffunctions.c will contain this header in addition to the other headers that you may need. So then how do you compile it? You compile it by first creating the .o file for f functions. Okay, so notice this command. So gcc -c means it does the file does not have a main function, and it creates a .o, that is a compiled file with object code in it, right? Similarly, you compile the library functions file also using .o, and I'm now giving it the standard name, that is lib at the start and .o at the end. Okay. Now, when we were discussing creation of libraries, what we said was there's an intermediate step here where you create a library with the AR command. Okay. So this will work for all the Ming, GW, and Linux people. This may not work for the uh, Windows people. So if you want to just directly use things, then you can use the object file directly, right? So gcc -o f functions.exe. So this is the file which will be the executable. Then give all the O files that you want. So first of all, you're giving the O file which is your file here, this one which you have compiled, and then the g functions file which contains the library, so gfunctions.o. So if you do this, then basically GCC takes these already compiled files and links them and then creates this executable, right? So this can now directly be executed on your computer. So every time you want to create, so supposing this gfunctions.o is the library you're looking at, then this particular, notice now this standard lib gfunctions.o is what is picked up. Okay, so this you can uh, you can do that instead of putting it in an archive and all those things, right? Directly just give the names of the .o files, they will get linked up and you will get your executable. So so we move on from here to a new topic now. What I want to discuss today is this switch statement. Okay, it's a very useful statement when you have a multi-way branch, right? So when you have a situation where you have several options and each option is supposed to be done under certain conditions, then one way to do it would be to write a very complicated conditional, right? If something, then you do something, then if something, then you do something, and so on and so forth. You'll have a fairly complicated if then else construct, which can be hard to read and understand. So for those kind of situations, the switch statement turns out to be a very convenient statement to have. Okay, and the structure of the switch statement is given here. So you have the switch keyword, then you have an integer valued expression here, which, so when you evaluate this expression you will get an integer, and then you have a sequence of case statements. So these are the sequence of statements which you will select, right? So you give the keyword case, give the constant expression which will evaluate to a particular integer, okay, and then a colon, and then you can keep cascading this, right? And finally you can have a default statement, that is if nothing matches here you can have a default statement. And so essentially what happens is that this integer valued expression is evaluated first, then it goes and matches this first case. If it matches, then it executes this statement. Okay, if this does not match, it comes to the next case. If that matches, then it executes this statement, and continues like that. Finally, if none of them match, then it executes the default statement. But please remember one thing, and that is what is called cascading. So if a case statement matches, then of course it executes this statement, and if this statement does not break or return, then it cascades to the next statement, next case, right? Then it does not exit automatically from here, from the statement, right? You have to exit from the switch statement explicitly, otherwise it will simply go to the next case and then the next case and then the next case. So this cascading keeps happening, so that is an important thing to remember. It is not like an if then. Okay, so that's the most important mistake people often make when using the C case statement. That is, you forget to exit from here. So one way to exit from here is just use the break. So if you use break, you will exit from this switch statement, and then it will start executing the statement at this point. Okay. So let me show you code for this in an actual example. Take for example a situation where you want to give the number of, so there are many problems which require fiddling with dates, right? You will be doing one or two of them in a forthcoming lab. So if you are doing that, then very often you need to know, for example, supposing the problem is that you want to calculate the number of days between two given dates. Okay, so this may be required in banking applications when you're looking at computing interest and stuff like that. So So you clearly need to see what is the number of as you progress from the start date to the end date, you will come across months which have let's say different number of days, right? Some months have 30 days, some months have 31 days, some months, the specific case of February, can have 28 days or 29 days depending on whether the year is a leap year or not, and so on. So if you are going to compute the number of days between two dates, you have to take care of this situation. So what this program is doing is essentially a small little thing which gives you the number of days in a particular month, right? Now there is a different way to do this, but this uh, this particular program is actually using the switch statement. So you can see here it reads a integer which is supposed to be between 1 and 12, okay, and if it's not between 1 and 12 it prints this, but we can get rid of this actually by using the case statement. Here I'm just printing it, but you don't need this, you can use the default here, right? So you can actually give this month in the switch statement. So this is an expression, it's a trivial expression, that is the direct value is an integer, and then you can see these cases, and these are cascading cases, notice. So what it says is case 1, so that means if the month is 1, or month is 3, month is 5, month 7, 8, 10 or 12, that is this Jan, March, May, July, August, October, December, then set days to 31, and then notice I'm saying break. So get out from here. If you don't say break, then it will come to the next case, which is this one. Okay. Uh, Once again, here also we are saying break, and here again we are saying break. Okay. So these are all the the months with 31 days. The next set of cases are all those with 30 days. Finally, you have February. We are saying 28 days because we don't know the year. We are just looking at a default case where 28 days. If you know the year, then you can decide whether it's a leap year and accordingly set days to 29 if it is a leap year and 28 if it is not. And finally, you have a default which prints that the month is illegal if it is not between 1 to 12. Okay. So of course here it's already being checked right at this point, but you don't need this check because of this default. And then it prints out the number of days in the given month. Okay. So let's try this out, and then we can remove this if month and try it out again. Okay, so as a matter of habit, you should get into the habit of checking inputs, and that's how I put this in. But notice that this is actually getting checked out here, but every time you give an illegal month, it's going to go through all of this till it comes to default, and then it will print this. Okay. Alternately, because you are doing this check, you can get rid of this default. You need not have this default. Remember, this default is optional. Okay, so let us compile this particular program. It's called switch.c. I'll store it in R. All right, it's compiled, so I run it now. So it tells me, asks me for a month between 1 and 12. So let's say I give 10. Okay, so you can see it prints out days in month 10 is 31. Let's execute it again. So let's say I say 6, which is June. So it says days in month 6 is 30. If I execute it again, uh, and I say 2. So days in month 2 is 28, 29 if leap year. Since we are not giving the year, it is simply printing out 28 and is warning you that if you really are in a leap year, then it should be 29, right? So it's a simple program, but you can do this using this switch. So it gives you a use case for the switch statement, right? So the you have many options here. So you have in all these options, you have to do different things. In this case, of course, many of the options bunch together, and so you have this all these cases getting bunched together. Applications, you may have cases used which are not bunched. Okay, so you may have a long case statement with multi-way options. That's very useful. If you try to program that with an if then else, it becomes quite messy. Okay? So that's the case statement. Let's see what happens if we kind of remove this break. Okay, I'll remove this break now. I'll compile it again. Okay, it's compiled. And let me give 5, which is May. So this is working fine in this case. Because it doesn't match any of these cases, right? But it actually cascades down, and let's remove all these breaks. Okay, so I'm just okay. So I've removed all these breaks now, and I'll recompile it and run it again. So let's say I give 5. Okay, so again it is working correctly because in this case the, uh, the matching is not happening, right? The match is not happening. So match has happened here, so it's working correctly. But please remember that you can have these are the cascades. So case 1, you would like to say days equal to 31. Case 3, days equal to 31. So each of these is a cascade already, right? So in the normal case, we'll have is case 1, days equal to 31, case 2, days equal to 31, and so on. So these become cascades. So let us try to look at a situation. Let us say we were looking at a situation where if 1 is there, then we say days equal to something. So let's say 40 for the sake of argument. Okay. And then let's compile this again. Run it. And let's say give 1. So notice what has happened, right? So days in a month 1 is 31, whereas I have actually said days equal to 40. So now if I enter a break out here, uh, sorry, I don't think I saved it. Alright, let's just go back to the earlier one. I don't know whether I saved it. Okay, let's save this. Let's compile this again. So do you see what has happened? You can now see the cascade working in a very direct way, right? So I have given a month which is legal. So notice what my code looks like, right? It goes through this case, it matches this case, right? It matches this case, days 31 is what I expect to be printed. But because there is no break here, it cascades into the next case. Now this case does not match because 4, 6, 9, etc. is there. Then it cascades to the next case. Again, case 2 does not match because it was 5. And then of course it cascades to default. Default always matches. So it goes and prints illegal month should be 1 to 12. Okay, so you see that uh, this cascading can create a problem. So what you need to do is get out after the so inside the statement, after the match has happened, you should get out. So I'm saving this now, and now I will recompile it and I'll run it. So now if I give any month with 31 days, so let's say 3, I'm getting the correct answer. If I give a month with let's say 4 April, then notice again I'm getting this problem, right? Because I don't have a break here. I don't have a break here. It matches this, does this, and then continues. So that behavior is slightly unintuitive, and so you must remember this, right? So always in this thing, if you have finished and you want to get out, please put an explicit break. Otherwise, it will go and continue with the other cases. I hope that is clear. Yeah. Is this the same as try and accept? No, not really. It's not the same as try and accept. As a matter of fact, the switch statement is there in languages which have try and accept. Try and accept is like if you have an exception being thrown, right? C does not have exceptions. Can you have a nested switch? Yes, you can have a nested switch. Yeah, grading will be done separately. So if you are given the quiz, grading will be done later, and once the grading is done, you will see your marks. Yeah, so if you haven't given a break, it will continue to the next case. Okay, it continues to the next case. Now this is a matching case, so it doesn't match, so nothing happens. So then it continues to the next case, that is this one. That again does not match. Then it continues to this case, which default means it always matches. So it goes and basically prints that, right? So please remember that if you have a default statement and you have forgotten the break, then it will go and execute the default statement. Yes, you will need a break after every case unless you want the default to be also executed after every case. Okay, most of the time you don't. I just want you to be clear about the behavior of case because it's not intuitive. People think that once you have chosen a case, you execute that case and get out. That is not what happens in case. Okay, you have to explicitly get out. Otherwise, it just continues matching the cases one after another. That's what I'm calling cascading. Cascading has a use because notice that after case 1, I'm not writing days equal to 31 break. After case 3, I'm not. So this cascading actually allows me to lump all these cases into a single statement here. Similarly, this cascading also allows me to lump all these cases into a single statement here. So this advantage is something that becomes useful, and so the cascading behavior is the default. Okay, so this is the case statement, and we are going to use it now in a different setting. Okay, uh, those of you who have had trouble with the quiz, please send me email. Don't interrupt the class. Okay, I'm not going to respond to that. So now we are going to actually look at something called multi-dimensional arrays, which are which are which are the equivalent of matrices. I don't know how many of you have done matrices in your school, uh, but basically we are going to look at how matrices, which are mathematical objects, can be simulated by multidimensional arrays. So if you recall, we started by discussing directly. We started by discussing sequences, right? We started with talking about selection sort, and we said sequences are modeled by one-dimensional arrays or represented by one-dimensional arrays in C. Now, another very common structure that you find in real life applications is the table, right? That is, it's two-dimensional. So you have a number of rows and columns. As a matter of fact, it is so common that you have full-fledged software to handle it, right? Like spreadsheets. A spreadsheet is a table. It has a certain number of rows, it has a certain number of columns, and then you have relationships between rows and columns and so on. In the context of programming, these two-dimensional structures are often called, and they are also very useful in mathematics, right? They are called matrices. So they become very useful when you're looking at, say, solution of linear equations. They are widely used in machine learning, and they are at the heart of linear algebra, right? Matrices allow you to do what are called linear transformations. So they are at the heart of linear algebra as a mathematical subject. But they are very, very practically useful in the sense that many problems boil down into a large set of linear equations. And we'll see how we can solve them later. But what we want to talk about today is how we model them or how we represent them in C. Okay? So 2D or two-dimensional data is, as I just noted, extremely common. And what you use to model two-dimensional data are so-called two-dimensional arrays. C also allows you to have higher dimensional arrays, but the support from C for higher dimensional arrays is not all that nice. And in fact, it's even not so nice for 2D arrays. Uh, Later versions of C like C99 etc. help you to do things much better, but right now we are using ANSI C mostly, so we are not going to use C99 features because not all compilers are still compatible with it. So we are going to stick with ANSI C, and ANSI C has some limitations when it comes to representing arrays. So let us see how we do this in C. Okay. Yeah. So now, so you have a two-dimensional structure. It's all in mathematics. It's called a matrix or an array, and it'll you normally say it's an m cross n matrix to say that there are m rows in the matrix and n columns in the. So here is an example matrix of floating point numbers. So you can see this is a 3 cross 4 matrix. It has 3 rows. So your row here, you have this row. This is the first row. This is the second row. Right. This is the first row, second row, and third row. And these are the columns. So this is the first column. This is the second column. This is the third column. This is the fourth column. So this is called a 3 cross 4 matrix. The first refers always to the number of rows, and the second refers always to the number of columns. Okay. If you want to represent this in C, instead of earlier we were using only one dimension, now you have to use two dimensions, right? So this is the number of rows, this is the number of columns, and you can initialize it in the same way. This is the first row, this is the second row, this is the third row. Okay. So this kind of direct representation is fairly simple. Now when you look at matrices and arrays, you want to refer to an element in the matrix or the array. So you will refer to a particular, let's say A is an array. You will refer to it by this notation, right? So this will be the ith element in the ith row and the jth column, right? So if you say example the value 4.8 in the previous this one, notice this again your numbering starts at 0, so this is actually 1 2, this is also 0 1 2 and 3, right? So this one, notice, is in row 1 column 2. So basically you will if you represent it by small a, the array, you will say a12. Okay, so a12 will be this element, assuming this whole array or matrix is represented by small a. However, when you treat it like a matrix in mathematics you don't start your numbering from 0, you start them from 1. So in mathematics, these will, if you think of it as a matrix, then this is row 1, row 2, row 3, which is the normal way in which you count. Similarly, this will be row column 1, column 2, column 3. So it's one more than this. So if you're looking at matrices are normally denoted by capital letters, and often people simply write it like this. So this whole thing will be written as 2 comma 3, okay, or people write it as a and 2 comma 3, right? Now this is matrix notation. This or this is matrix notation, which is used in mathematics. Okay, when you go into programming, normally you will have small letters representing arrays, and you will have obviously counts numbering starting from 0 instead of 1. Remember that. Okay. Uh, So that's what we are saying here, that indices start from 0 in C, but they start at 1 in when you're talking of matrices and mathematical objects. And matrices are normally denoted by capital letters. So if you say A2 comma 3, so this is the element in the second row and third column, which was the same 4.8. Okay. Now, when you're talking about matrices in mathematics, we don't talk about how it is stored inside a computer, right? So inside a computer, the matrix can be stored in multiple ways, and it depends on how it is stored. And actually, the reason for some of the problems that C has with higher dimensional matrices is precisely because of the way in which it is stored. So if you have a matrix of rows and columns, you can now remember that memory in a computer is basically linear, right? What I mean by that is that if you have whatever amount of memory, it is just linearly addressed from, say, 1 location 1 to whatever is the size of your memory. So supposing you have 4 GB memory, then you will go till 4 GB here, okay, that is 4 billion. But this whole thing is linear, this is not two-dimensional. So it starts at 1 2 3 4 5 so on until it goes to 4 billion. So how do you store this? So this has to be linearized, right? This is two-dimensional. Now you can at least there are two obvious ways in which you can linearize it. You can store it row-wise, or you can store it column-wise. That is, you can store it like this: 3.1, then 2.8, then 7.5, then 4.2. You have stored the first row first, and then you store the next row, 2.2, 1.7, and so on, right? So this way of storing a matrix in memory is called a row major representation or storage, right? Row major, so it's row by row. Well, you need not store things this way. You could store it in column for at a time. So you could instead of saying row by row, you can store it like this: 3.1. Then instead of 2.8, you store 2.2. Then you store 9.0. Then you store 2.8, and so on. Okay, so this is called column measure. So if you store things in this way, notice that the linear address of this particular thing. So let us say you have stored this in the first location. So this is location 1, this is location 2, this is location 3, and so on. So when you want to address memory, then there is a difference. So if you want the second element 2.8 in the first row, then it is at position 2 if you store it in row major form. If you want to get it out when it is stored in column major form, then notice that it is not at position 2, but it is at position 4. So it depends on the number of number of rows that you have to get to the second element in the very first row, because you are storing all the rows, it's in column major form, so the first column is fully stored, then you get to the first element of the second row, and then again so on. So you can, of course, knowing the number of rows and columns, you can calculate this, but notice that the address is different. Here it is 4, here it is 2. So it inside the computer, since everything is going to go linearly, you have to be bothered about how the matrix is stored. Is it stored, in a programming language, you have to decide whether it is stored in row major form or it is stored in column major form. Okay, so so in C, it turns out that it is stored in row major form. Okay, and because of that, when you are passing arguments, only the first argument can remain unspecified. The number of columns has to be specified, because it needs to know where the next one will be, right? So if you give both of them are not known, then you have a problem. So only one, you have to specify the columns, because the data is, or two-dimensional data in C is stored in row major form. Okay, I guess I'll show you code next time to do matrix manipulations, and of course we'll look at matrix arithmetic also, because matrices are mathematical objects. You can do various kinds of operations on them. We'll see what those operations are, then we'll see an implementation of that, and then we'll look at how matrices can be used to solve linear equations. Okay, all right, we'll stop with this. Those of you who have had any problems with the quiz, please send me mail about it, and we'll see. We are going to have a large number of quizzes, so don't bother too much if you have either not done well in this quiz, or couldn't do the quiz because of some technical reasons, like you lost power or you couldn't connect. We will have backup quizzes for these reasons. Okay, so we'll stop today, and if you have any questions regarding the lab, or you have any questions, other questions not related to the class, you can always send me email. Okay, in the class, please confine your questions on chat to whatever is being discussed in the class. uh, we'll keep conducting quizzes, don't worry, because the whole idea is that you should keep up to date with whatever is happening. So we are going to have a quiz practically every week. Yeah, you can mail me anytime, not just today, anytime.